KCM Wealth Management. Vancouver lawyers Dumoulin Boscovich. Vancouver Courier newspaper. David and Mark Goodman. Long before Nike was saying just do it, the Tsimshian were saying why, which means just do it. Calvin Helin, lawyer, author, lecturer, is here with us in the studio today, and that's your proposition for getting out of child poverty, getting out of unemployment, getting off the welfare rolls, is just do it. Spell it out. Just do what?
It's well, essentially, that's just a call, is intended to be a call to action. But if you're going to try to get yourself out of any form of economic dependency, the first thing you have to understand, like you were talking about in relation to our earlier conversations about addictions, if you don't understand or admit you have a problem, you're never going to deal with it. So most Aboriginal people on reserves have been brought up thinking that somebody else is going to take care of their problems, that is the federal government. But that is really a bargain with the devil, because you have to have your own self-interest in mind. If you think that somebody else is going to look after you, and they tell you they're going to, and you believe it, you may as well go out and buy some snake oil, because right. Nobody has your self-interest in mind but you. It's just a fundamental thing about our social nature. And so the first thing you have to do as an individual is you have to understand it, you have to admit it, and then you have to own these problems. Even though they weren't created by you, you have to take these problems and in your heart and your soul and your mind and say they're my problems and I have to deal with them.
Responsibility rests squarely on the shoulders of Indigenous people themselves.
Yeah, and that can be said about anybody. If you want to create a better future for yourself, you have to be responsible for creating your success.
And one of the things I love that you said so squarely in your book, because we've been saying this about addictions issues for only 40 years, no more studies are needed.
No.
In other words, we don't need to spend another $6 million on another study of the problem of child poverty or addictions or unemployment. We know, and here's your formula that I loved: values, effort, ownership, skills.
Absolutely.
Give us some examples.
Well, I think that the first issue that I thought about when I was writing my first book is how will I explain what I'm saying to Aboriginal people and not sound like I'm Attila the Hun or somebody like that. I mean, Aboriginal people are so used to getting beaten up, they feel, by everybody, that they get their backs up when people start talking about this. So the way I explained it was in terms of the 10,000-year canoe journey. The tribe I'm from, the Tsimshian, have been in the same place for at least 13,000 years. They've lived continuously in the area around Prince Rupert. And I said, well, you can say that for most tribes across North America. So I said, let's just imagine we had this metaphorical canoe of Aboriginal tribes and societies sailing through time and space for 10,000 years. And the question that I asked is, why is it that we've only had this problem in the last 400 years, all of these social issues and pathologies? And then what did our ancestors do when there was no welfare, there was no transfer payments? Were my ancestors laying on the couch eating potato chips waiting for a welfare check? Well, absolutely not.
In fact, when the Europeans came to the eastern coast of what became the United States of America, they found Indigenous peoples who were publishing newspapers.
I didn't know that, but I'd like to learn more about that.
It is true. And who had large cities.
Yes, yes. Well, most people don't know that, for example, the U.S., after the War of Independence, was trying to figure out what kind of country it should be. They didn't like monarchies or anything like that. And so what they ended up doing was looking to the Iroquois Confederacy. And
That's right.
because the Iroquois Confederacy was a group of 6 nations, and they'd been warring for years and years, and they figured out a very sophisticated way of joining together and dealing with all of their issues in a peaceful way.
Okay, let's get into the present and the future. Osoyoos and the Choctaw Nation in Mississippi, those are 2 wonderful examples that you quote of indigenous people saying, I mean, the Osoyoos story is astounding. What has it been, a decade or so? Just very few years.
It's only been about 10 years.
Yeah, they've gone from dreadful dependency to running all kinds of businesses, and they're bringing in millions of dollars in enterprise, and they're employing thousands of people, including non-Aboriginals.
That has to do, in the first instance, I believe, with leadership.
Absolutely.
And Chief Clarence Louis,
Yep.
you know, he's been prepared to say that the emperor has no clothes, and to deal with the issues, and to very aggressively go out and look at various forms of independent revenue. Because if you look at the situation with First Nations communities, the way they've been purposely set up is to be 100% reliant on transfers from the federal government. If you go to any Business 101 course, the first thing they're going to tell you is if all your revenues are coming from one source, you're in a position to be put out of business by one client, right?
And you say in your book that 0% of the wealth among indigenous peoples these days is from the private sector.
That's not true now.
No, that's right.
Not true now.
Thank goodness.
You have examples like, as you referred to, the Choctaws.
Yep.
Close to Vancouver here, you have the Squamish, who have a whole array of very good businesses and a very good group of people that are involved in developing all of these things.
I want to ask you the outrageous question that I think all of us think about from time to time. What if the Indian Act just stopped? What if that fountain were turned off today? I know that's not good planning, it's not responsible. This should be turned off over a period of time with the goals set and so on. But what if it were just shut off right now?
I would think you would have a lot of misery. It's like the same argument that's been made by me in the economic dependency trap and Dambisi Moyo on aid to Africa.
Yep.
Dambisi Moyo, I think, proposes a 5-year period of phasing out essentially aid to Africa, systemic aid. I think that's too short, but I think what you should do is you need some kind of strategic plan with measurable goals, and you need capacity. If you don't have people who can manage their own affairs, you are going to end up with a real big problem.
Now, we're slowly getting there. I worked for Langara College for a few years. Langara College, among others, now not only has Aboriginal studies, but it has lots of Aboriginal employees, and it has lots of Aboriginal students. When I say lots, I mean more than 2. Mm-hmm. You know, there's a handful, and that's lots. Mm-hmm. You know, because I go so far back, I remember when Gloria Webster was practically I think the first person to graduate from university. Mm-hmm. That goes back a few years. Now we're finally getting people. Now, tell me the story that you quote in your book that I love about Carolyn Krauss, the educator, who has shown that hugs are not what self-esteem is about, that accomplishment is what gets people to feel good about themselves.
Absolutely. Well, just for your information, Carolyn has just been appointed to the Blue Ribbon panel for reviewing the Aboriginal education system. Carolyn Krauss is a Cherokee lady, and she went into the Grandview School in East Vancouver, where we run this martial arts club for poor kids.
Yeah.
And that's how I met her. We set up a martial arts club there. And it was essentially almost the worst performing school in BC. Parents were pulling their kids out, and there was all kinds of problems. And what she found was that there was a complete emphasis on culture and education and no emphasis on academic standards. And she found that the Aboriginal kids didn't like being segregated from the rest of the kids. They liked being with everybody else, all of their friends.
Imagine that.
Yeah, and so she introduced a series of measures that included bringing the community into the school, and on the exam, they just came out. I forget what they call them. The provincial exams where they measure the schools.
Right. The school topped.
Yeah, she went from the absolute bottom to very close to the top, which was incredible.
Yeah.
And because a lot of those kids down there have all kinds of problems. But I think what it is an example of what can be done. Like, we're not just talking about things that we might do. These things have been done. And it's just like all of these kinds of reforms that we've talked about in relation to Indigenous people. You just need to go to New Zealand and see what the Maori are doing to see an example of everything I've talked about in both of these books being put into action.
Calvin, we just have a moment or two left. Have you spoken to these leaders, to Stuart Phillip and the other leaders who were part of the First Nations Summit, who sent out this kind of alarm 3 weeks ago, saying the government needs to do more about child poverty? Have you?
I have not spoken to them at all, and I think that the situation is acute on the one hand, and so there's a role for government to be more careful. But on the other hand, we have to have maybe even a long-term strategic plan in relation to how to deal with these kids. And part of that is I think, an examination of what our own community needs to do.
Good luck. I think your voice is we're basically out of time, Calvin, and I say thank you. I think your voice is a very, very important one, and I hope to see you, in a sense, be even more politically involved in the coming months and years. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you here. Okay. All right, folks. Next week we're taking a hiatus. No, we're taking a hiatus. We're taking a week off. They're going to hose down the whole building or something, and so we'll be back following. But that doesn't mean that you'll miss this show, because we're going to repeat one of our episodes, and the reason is that, as you know, the whole story about the big casino going up next to the football stadium is very hot these days, and it's ongoing. So we will repeat our conversation with our former Attorney General Jeff Plant on the really, really big casino plan. Thanks so much for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you again here on Shaw Community TV, Channel 4.